This is kind of fortuitous because my story kind of bridges the gap between some of the stories told tonight. You know, I've noticed as far as surprises go, that the most bitter and the most sweet things in the world tend to be surprises. Surprise, you're 12 years old and now you have to shave. Surprise, you're in Ireland, you're 18 and they don't have photo ID. So that was actually where me and my best friend from high school.
That's why I couldn't get beer tonight.
Yeah, and that's why we could get beer there.
You got the best of it, son.
Yes. But my best friend from high school and I, we were pretty tight, and we went over to Ireland, and that's where we had our first beer, which was a surprise because we were at a castle, and you see they have castles over there that. Over here we have to build theme parks. Over there they just repurpose the historical artifacts. But my best friend from high school and I had a mutual rival. This was a guy by the name of Noah Harris. He was on the football team, picked on my best friend. He was the only guy I ever threw a punch at. And I have to, in my defense, I was 12, it was on the playground. I was tired of people making fun of my facial hair that was coming in. But over time, there was another surprise, and that was that Noah and I actually became friends. And we were in theater together, and we did literary meet and extemporaneous speaking, which is a whole art form of surprise in and of itself. What you do is you spend a year building a file of things to talk about, and you have no clue what you're going to have to deliver a speech on. So that's good preparation for storytelling. And so anyway, and actually, sidebar, there was a surprise this week. I won an iPad, which you would think with my thick rimmed glasses and my beat up sneakers that I would have one. I certainly think I deserve one, but apparently you have to have money. So I won one, so that's a great surprise there. But anyway, became friends with Noah Harris through theater. And the theater teacher there, she was this woman who would, you did not fall asleep on a bus trip with her, because she would get a hole puncher, and she would stand over anyone who fell asleep and threaten to pierce their ear with it. Just make sure that she wouldn't do it. But she would, although she wanted you to think she would. And so through this woman, Linda Miller, wonderful, vivacious woman, I became friends with Noah Harris, who had been my rival, like I say, the only guy that I had ever thrown a punch at. And so we're going to flash forward a little bit. I've gone off to college. I dropped out of college. My high school theater teacher, who I keep running into random places, says, you need to go back to school. You need to go back to school. Well, at that point, it was a surprise to me that I did. So I was kind of working through that. And I was trying to get into comic books, glasses, what's an iPad, I think we've established my nerd credentials. I was trying to get into comic books as a writer. And I was writing back and forth with this guy, Jeff Loeb. You guys ever seen Commando with Schwarzenegger or Teen Wolf? He wrote those. And so I was writing back and forth with him, burning the midnight oil, working a job as a waiter, trying to break in as a writer for these comic books. And then it was on my 20th birthday. I opened the inbox and I see the words, we're going to use one of the stories that you, and I couldn't finish reading it. So I had to give my parents my email password, which I promptly changed again, to get them to read it for me. I had to go home and get them to read it for me. And so what Jeff was telling me was that if I could be out in San Diego at the big Comic-Con event, they would talk about using one of my stories in a Superman comic of all things. And I was excited. And so he said, are you going to be there? And I said, well, sure. Then I realized I didn't know how I was going to be there. So I spent the next couple of weeks picking up extra shifts at work. I did everything I possibly could, and I was still coming up short. And then my parents pull me aside and they say, well, Patrick, your grandmother died a couple months back. And I said, yeah. And they said, did you know that she left you $1,000? And I thought, wow, okay, so my trip is set. So I was grooming for this. I was set for it. Went out and got a new pair of shoes because my parents were saying that the type of shoes you have might indicate that you travel in artsy circles. And I was grooming grooming my voice. I was going to be, debonair. I went out there in a suit in the middle of 70-degree heat, because let's face it, in San Diego it's 60 to 70 year-round, but still it's 70 degrees out. And I was so far out from the convention center that I literally lost 20 pounds on that trip just walking. But I get in there and I extend my hand out and I'm like, "Hello, Jeff, I'm Patrick," because this is the first time we've met in person. And he says, "Hello, Patrick, I'm Jeff." I realized that my writer voice was already taken, so I promptly dropped it. And so from there, we got talking about things. He set me up for pitching with his editor, and his editor didn't want to take any pitches, and so it came down to the very last day of the convention. I'd gone to Kinko's and had all these presentations printed up to hand off, and I should have realized that there's a problem with this, and that is that surprises can work out well. Plans usually don't. But, yes. And so, Jeff, I walk up to Jeff on the last day of the convention, and I'm like, the editor just won't take my pitch. And this is Kids Day at the convention. And so Jeff's son is standing right behind him, Sam, and I say, "I'm going to have to leave for the airport in an hour. And they just won't take my pitch. Can I just give it to you?" And he said, "No, we'll see about that." And so he abandons a line with like 30 people trying to get comic books autographed and walks over to his editor with his son in tow. And I don't know what he says to him, but he walks up behind his editor and grabs him by the shoulders and whispers something in his ear with that writer voice. And then he walks over to me and he says, "Take your pitches, slide them face down on the table, walk away." Okay, well, I had overheard stories that he was a very forceful personality, I guess from his Hollywood background, and I thought, well, that's great. And so I slid the pitches over across the table. Never heard anything back on them. But it was 5 years later, to the day that I had first heard about this, that I got the news, well, first of all, online, that Jeff's son, who he'd been trying to get into writing as well, passed away of cancer. And I thought back to that moment of me sliding the pitch across the table. And then, double whammy, that night, I get news that Noah, who I mentioned before, the only guy I ever threw a punch at, had died in Iraq. And ordinarily, I had enough distance from my life as a high school student that I wouldn't ordinarily go back. But I think what happened with Jeff's son, it prompted me to go back, to go to Noah's funeral. And it was ridiculous. George W. Bush mentioned him on television, and there were yellow ribbons all up and down the highway, and they were turning him into this kind of martyr figure. And I was shocked by the whole thing. And I wasn't really sure what to make of it, because I really wasn't sure what to make of the whole war at that point. And it was a process that I was having to come to grips with this sort of psychic divide in our country. And so I get to the funeral, and there is Linda Miller, the vivacious, wonderful teacher, and I'm talking to her about the future and about plans that I have and about how I'm thinking about going to grad school. She stops me. She says, "You don't want my recommendation, do you?" And I said, "Well, if you want to write one, I won't reject it. I hadn't thought about asking you." And she said, "No, that's good." She said, "I hate it when my high school students come back to me and ask for recommendations, because it means that they haven't made any contacts. They haven't lived any since they went off to college." And so, 6 months later, I heard that she had cancer, and she became known as the veiled lady of the town. And she wore a black veil after she lost her hair. And I went back to her funeral. And I mean, this was something nobody saw coming, but I went back to her funeral, and there were hundreds of theater students all around. All of Noah's friends, all of my friends, all of her students, we'd all gathered. And it was the biggest funeral I've ever seen. It was like an auditorium seating in a church for the service. And she touched so many more people than I'd ever realized. It was a surprise to me. And so, at the end of that night, we all got together out in the parking lot. and we did theater warm-ups, and we sang, and we danced. And through this weird, circuitous series of events that involves drinking in Ireland and facial hair, and all these things that nobody could ever possibly calculate, I was left with one last wonderful surprise from this wonderful woman who had been there in the background, but I'd never realized just how many lives she touched. Thank you very much.